something very serious now in the ACT, where the Labor Greens government have just today released their community consultation report. They are considering the most radical assisted suicide legislation in our nation. Every other state has legalised assisted suicide for people 18 plus who are terminally ill. Well, the ACT is taking it a step way too far, in my estimation. They're talking about making it accessible to people who have dementia, making it accessible even to people as young as 14 years of age. On the one hand, this seems absolutely outrageous, but on the other, if people have bought into the idea that killing is a legitimate way to end suffering, then does it matter whether that suffering is mental, physical, emotional even? We've seen this slippery slope play out time and time again in jurisdictions far from our shores. But of course, as it became legal all around our nation, those doomsayers were shouted down. Oh, the slippery slope argument, the slippery slope argument. Well, here we see it playing out in the ACT, and we wanted to get your thoughts, so we took to the streets to ask you what you thought of this move.
Would you be in favour of euthanasia?
Yes.
Why?
Because people deserve to die with dignity.
I think people should have a choice.
They've just got nothing to look forward to. It's a strain on their friends, family, and I do believe they should be allowed to be released.
In the ACT, they're now talking about allowing 14-year-olds to be euthanised. How do you feel about that?
Seems very young. I suppose if the same things apply, if there's no further pleasure in their life, maybe the same thing would still apply.
No, I don't think it should be as young as 14. That would be up to a guardian to decide.
I mean, potentially that might be a bit too young, but then also, you know, you hear of people that are going through horrific diseases, cancer, whatnot, and they know that there's no cure, they know that they're not going to survive any treatment. At the end of the day, it's their body and they should have that choice.
Excuse me, do you think euthanasia should be legalised?
Definitely not.
Sir, do you agree with euthanasia?
Sure.
Why is that?
It's their choice.
How would you feel about 14-year-olds being able to get euthanised? They're talking about that in the ACT now.
No idea. Haven't been following it, but probably not, no. I'm talking about old people that are at the end of their thing.
I've always stood by my Christian values and thought that it shouldn't, although having palliative cared for loved ones, it's made me rethink it.
In the ACT now, they're talking about allowing 14-year-olds to have access to euthanasia. How do you feel about that?
Oh, that's ridiculous.
It's a hard question for people to answer, especially when they're talking about making it as liberal as the ACT is. Personally, I find this a really sad issue. I find it incredibly hard to support euthanasia under any circumstances. But here we have a society now that's been told that this is compassion. We put down dogs, and yet we expect people to suffer because we live in a generations that are taught that any suffering is bad. Even if you've been triggered by somebody, you know, you need a safe space. It's clearly an injustice that you're upset. And this seems to have translated into this whole understanding of, no, it's compassion. Even if someone wants to take their life, we should support them. Then they came up with the ingenious, this is dying with dignity, which I find disgusting, by the way, because it then means that people who are otherwise dying and do need some help, whether it's going to the bathroom, whether it's showering themselves, getting old, etc., can be what some would call undignified. But I find it disgusting that as a society, we've succumbed to that to a point that we actually agree with people now.
I think there's more harm done these days in the name of compassion and love than in the name of hate.
Yeah.
And in the name of compassion, we've started to agree to all sorts of ridiculous things. I mean, in Canada now, 1/3 of Canadians agree that euthanasia would be appropriate as a way of solving homelessness because, you know, you're pretty miserable if you don't have a home. So if you'd prefer to die, well, the state should offer that option. I mean, it would be great for the government because their homeless statistics would go down and they could say, look, we've solved the problem. Yeah, if you put everyone to death who's got a problem, it's amazing how good society can be. But it's not a slippery slope, as you pointed out earlier. It's a flipping water slide.
It's pretty extraordinary. And the health minister in the ACT has referred to what the rest of the country, everywhere bar New South Wales pretty much now has euthanasia laws, and pretty much everywhere has a rule that you have to be within 6 or 12 months of, terminal illness in order to have access to it. The ACT health minister has described this as arbitrary, basically opening the door to saying, well, you know, why 12 or 6 months? Why not 24 months? Why not 48 months? Why not, you know, I get cancer now, you've got a prognosis of 10 years, well, let's call it quits now. I mean, you're basically opening the door to saying, well, anyone at any time can walk in and say, all right, I want to check out now. I mean, does that mean you end up people who are depressed, who say, look, I really don't want to be here anymore? Instead of offering them treatment and medication and help, we go, all right, well, there's an option over there, just go and top this.
Yeah, instead of, as a society, getting around that person and saying, we are going to make your life worth living. You're one of the saddest guys that we interviewed in the Voxies, I think it was you, or maybe Caleb.
The bloke at the end,
But he was saying, you know, they've run out of pleasure in their lives, they're lonely. That is heartbreaking. That is not a reason to tap out. That's when your society should be getting around you and saying, mate, we are going to make the time that you've got left some of the most meaningful years of your life. These are the golden years. Instead of this, oh, well, let's be compassionate. He wants to die with dignity, etc. and so on. And that's why they're opening the can of worms, because once you subscribe to believing that this is dignity, this is compassion, then why should you deny that dignity or compassion to anyone?
And the big problem is when you give this power to government.
Yeah.
I mean, in Canada, there was a story a while back of a veteran who was having trouble with wheelchair access in their home. And so they would been ringing Veterans Affairs for months trying to get someone, can you come and install a wheelchair ramp? And they said, look, it's going to be a bit of a wait, but we can offer you, this is what they said, medical assisted dying if you prefer.
What?
And this was a big outrage in Canada. But I mean, when you give the government that kind of power and then you've got public servants suggesting, well, have you considered death?
Yeah, and also what that does to people mentally.
I know.
Knowing that it's an option. It's smiled upon, it's okay, it's state-sanctioned, for heaven's sake. It's totally legal. But how that would play on your mind, especially when we already live in quite a utilitarian society where it's like, you know what, Caleb, you're coming up on your use-by date. You're not as useful as you used to be. How that would play on your mind. Am I a burden on my family? But like it literally, it makes me quite emotional. I think it's disgusting.